It is wonderful to be able to be here. Thank you so much, Mo. And thank you so much for creating the sense of community. Rich and I were just talking earlier about feels like we're coming home after so many years of being away. This kind of feels like tribe. And what I want to share with you today is it's not only inspiring for me to be able to be here and see all of you and know all of you are also passionate like I am about bringing more mindfulness, bringing more compassion, bringing more wisdom into our organizations. But one of the things that I hope to be able to also inspire you is what we are seeing today is that we are seeing that there is a recognition out there that there is a need for more wisdom, more compassion, more mindfulness in organizations. My work is with Potential Project. We're a global organization that has the privilege of being able to work in 28 countries and work with some global organizations like Cisco or Accenture or IKEA. And I can tell you, which is inspiring to me, that in sitting down with C-suites at those organizations, they are looking to all of us to say, how can we bring more compassion and more wisdom into our organizations? And so I think that what I want to say today is I want to share with you not only a message, hopefully, of hope and inspiration, but also maybe a call to action. There is a lot of pain and suffering in the working world today. We know that. And I think all of us need to be warriors of compassion to be able to address the needs and bring the skills that all of you in this room I know have and all of us together are cultivating and developing. So today what I want to do is I want to share with you, first of all, just some insights into how we see compassionate leadership. I want to share with you our research that we've done in terms of looking at compassionate leadership in organizations. And I also want to share with you our approach to bringing more compassion and more wisdom into organizations. And I'm hoping that you'll be able to leave with at least one tip, one tool, one technique that'll support you in your journey of bringing more compassion into organizations. Does that sound like a good plan for this morning? You game for that? All right, I'm in the right crowd. That's great. So I do want to make this interactive, and I want to start out with a simple question. In one word, what do you see as being the most pressing challenge for leaders today? And I'll just randomly, somebody over here, one word, pressing challenge for leaders today. Go ahead. Presence. Over here. Division. Thank you. Yes. Stress. Absolutely. You had your hand. Yes. Risk. Thank you. Over here. Yes. Buy-in. Yes. Vulnerability. Yes, go ahead. Mental wellness. Yes, thank you. Burnout. Absolutely. One more. Yes. Trust. So what's interesting about all of those things, when we talk about leadership, none of you said, it's the strategy, or it's that spreadsheet that we need to fix, or somehow it's the marketing plan. All of the things that you talked about are human factors. The soft side of leadership, the ability for us to have trust, to have vulnerability, to address divisions, to be able to come together. And this is, I think, what's both inspiring and also what's needed today, is for us to really look at being able to bring the human side of leadership, the human side of work. And just to, again, give you some context around Potential Project, that is our purpose. Our purpose is to create a more human world of work by harnessing the full potential of the mind. And specifically, diving a little bit deeper into that, we believe that leadership actually begins in the mind. I mean, it is our mind that creates our behaviors. It is our behaviors that shapes our habits. It is our habits that shapes the people that we lead. And so fundamentally, and I think I'm in the right room when I say this, if we can help leaders to be able to better understand and manage their mind in positive ways to be able to support their organization, we know that we can bring more benefit to be able to help people to be more calm, more clear, more kind, more wise in their actions. And a number of years ago, we actually published a book on this. In 2018, it was called The Mind of the Leader. And in that journey, we really wanted to see what were the core qualities of success for leaders today to be able to help to address the challenges. This was pre-pandemic. Moving on, what we see today is one of the biggest challenges for leaders in our world today is essentially how to do the hard things that they need to do as leaders, but do them in a human way. And what we found in our conversations with leaders is that many leaders think it's a binary choice. Think, I can either be a good leader and a good human being, or I can be a good leader that gets things done. And I have to choose between one of these things because I can't be both. And what we wanted to do in our research was we wanted to test the hypothesis and challenge this assumption that we had to choose between being a good leader or a good human being. And fundamentally, what we did was we wanted to make this also data-driven, because when you talk about compassionate leadership, oftentimes, not in this crowd, but in other crowds, people roll their eyes and think, yeah, that's soft, that's flaky. So we really wanted to make this based on data. So we interviewed over 350 C-suite executives. We assessed over 1 million data points. We got data from leaders and employees in over 70 countries. And we also partnered with a number of academic institutions that you can see that helped us to go through reams and reams of data to be able to help us understand and analyze the understanding, the underpinning of compassionate leadership in organizations. And the key thing that we found was very hopeful is not only can we bring both compassion and wisdom into our organizations and into our leaderships, but we must. The workforce today is not only demanding and accepting and deserves us to be able to create the conditions where people can flourish and people can bring their best human nature, their best human potential to the table. And it's now a requirement for leaders. It's no longer an either or. It needs to be a both and. And when we look at this both and of doing the hard things in a human way, we translate the hard things in terms of the wisdom that we need to bring to the table, the human things in terms of the compassion that we need to bring to the table. Wisdom being knowing the right things to do and having the courage to be able to do them, which is not easy to do. And compassion, really being able to start with empathy, connect with empathy, but then having that intention and creating an opportunity to be able to create a conditions where care and people can flourish. And so this idea of being able to do the hard and the human, the courage and the candor, all of these things coming together was what we found in our research. But that was from a qualitative perspective. We also found that from a quantitative perspective, it also demonstrated that the real magic in leadership happens when we are perceived by our employees, and let me be clear, not when we think we're wise and compassionate, but when we are perceived by our employees at being both wise and compassionate. Thank you very much, yes. So what this graph shows, and you may not be able to see it, so I'll just walk you through it, is that the dark blue there shows if we're compassionate, the benefits to our employees in terms of things like job satisfaction, org commitment, job performance, burnout, leader satisfaction, job engagement. What then we see, the gray bars actually show that when we as leaders bring wisdom to the table, again, in the eyes of our employees. But it's the teal bars, or I'm not actually sure what color they are here on the screen, but on my computer they were teal anyway. But the teal bar shows that when we are able to combine the two, the both and leadership, the hard and the human, the wisdom and compassion, that is when we see 2.5 times greater job satisfaction, almost 2 times better org commitment, 2 times better job performance, 3 times less burnout, 2 times better job satisfaction and job engagement. So that in and of itself is very inspiring. But what we want to do now is to be able to say, okay, well, let's unpack. What do we actually mean by compassion? And for that, I want to invite you to consider what we call the landscape of compassion. You can look at it in terms of our willingness to act on the one side and our understanding of another person's experience on the other. And if we start at the bottom, we can see the experience of pity, which is basically, I feel sorry for you. Not a lot of willingness to act and not a lot of understanding of another person's experience. Moving up from there, we can go to sympathy, which is I feel for you, a little bit more willingness to act and a little bit more understanding of another person's experience. But next, I want to go to empathy. And here, I want to take a little bit of a pause because I think in this room, this is really important for us to unpack. What we define as empathy, and this is working with neuroscientists, we understand empathy to be the experience of I feel with you. It is an amazing human capacity that we have to be able to connect with another person's sorrow, connect with another person's joy. It's why we cry at the end of a movie when James Bond dies because we think it's going to be over. It's our ability to be able to then also see when somebody is suffering and be able to check in with them and really be able to understand what might be going on for them. But here's the important thing from a leadership perspective is empathy, although it is beautiful and it is our way to be able to connect with other human beings, we need, in our view, to take that one step further. And that one step further is how we define compassion, which is the intention to be of benefit. And essentially, what we want to be able to do is we want to take that ability for us to connect with empathy, but to lead with compassion. And the reason for this, and this is why I really want to make sure I unpack this just a little bit further, is that empathy, as beautiful and as important as it is, it actually has some downsides. It's important for all of us to understand. So if you think about it, if you have an employee or a colleague that's really suffering, a mountain of paperwork, or more likely a mountain of emails and back-to-back meetings and all of the other things that we know that put us under so much pressure, an experience of empathy is basically sharing the suffering, whereas the experience of compassion is the ability to be able to alleviate the suffering. Empathy being an emotion, whereas compassion being an intention. And this is not just definitions and wordsmithing. From a neurological perspective, what we can understand when we look at fMRI scans is that when we experience empathy, we experience it in the emotional centers of our brain, whereas when we are able to make the shift to compassion, we are able to activate the executive functioning part of our brains. And that can make all the difference in terms of overcoming some of the downsides of empathy. Because what the research shows is that empathy, although it is incredibly important, we can over-index on empathy and start to get burned out ourselves. Many of us have probably experienced that in the last number of years. We know that empathy, we tend to empathize more with people that look like us than people that don't look like us. So in our desire to be able to create more diverse and inclusive environments, empathy can actually hold us back from being able to connect with people that are different than us. We also know that empathy can be fleeting. I can have a wave of empathy right now, but like many emotions, it's gone, and then I'm no longer able to step into the challenges. And further, we actually know that empathy can lead to poor moral decisions, because out of our kindness, out of our care, we can focus on one person and not look out for the best interests of the many. So empathy is important, but compassion, on the other hand, when we're able to bring that intention to be of benefit, when we're able to make that mental shift to our prefrontal cortex, to be able to take things from the longer point of view, we're able to generate many more benefits for ourselves, for our organization. But I don't just want to talk about it. Are you guys game to join me in a little exercise to experience the difference between empathy and compassion? Yes? All right. What I'm going to invite you to do, and I'm just warning you up front, is I am going to invite you to bring to mind somebody that you know that is suffering. If at any point that you feel that it gets a little bit overwhelming, please remember self-care. You can just let go of the exercise and just take a deep breath and enjoy the space. So with that, I would like to invite you to take a moment to close your eyes. And I'm going to invite you to just consider, what does it feel like to be you in this moment? And noticing if you have any tension anywhere in your body. Just invite you to be kind to yourself in this moment. Perhaps rolling your shoulders if you need to, maybe taking a nice deep breath. Just allowing yourself the gift of being able to be present in this moment. Now, I'm going to invite you to bring to mind somebody that you know that is struggling. Could be somebody at work, be somebody in your personal life. But I want you to see if you can visualize that person as if they were standing in front of you. Noticing their face, feeling their energy. And I want you to once again take a moment to consider, what does it feel like to be you right now? And if you notice a little bit of heaviness, Maybe a little bit of sadness as you're visualizing this person that you care about that is struggling. More than likely, you are experiencing empathy. That beautiful human emotion, our ability to connect with another person's pain. And just sit with that for a moment. You can feel what that feels like. And if you don't feel anything at all, that's also okay. Just continue with the visualization. And now what I'd like to invite you to do is to see if you can take a mental step back, still visualizing that person as if they were in front of you, but taking a mental step back by asking the question, how can I be of benefit? Not necessarily trying to come up with any answers, but simply asking the question over and over in your mind, visualizing the person, how can I be of benefit? How can I be of benefit? How can I be of benefit? And if something comes up, great, but then keep asking the question, how can I be of benefit? And now pausing and again taking a moment to notice, what does it feel like to be you right now? And if you notice a little bit more sense of empowerment, maybe a little bit more sense of ease, you may have made that mental shift from the emotional centers of our brain into the prefrontal cortex to be able to enable us to have that broader perspective, that intention to be of benefit. And if you didn't notice anything at all, that's also okay. And with that, I'll invite you to let go of the visualization and just take a moment to make note of anything that you experienced in that exercise. And if there was somebody that came up and there was something that came up, I'd invite you to just take an opportunity to write a note of something that you might want to follow up on. And just to be clear around compassion, compassion doesn't have to be solving people's problems. Oftentimes, there are many problems that we simply cannot solve. But compassion can simply be telling somebody, hey, I was at this conference and this strange woman led me through this weird exercise and I was thinking of you. People want to be seen. People know that we can't solve all their problems, but being able to connect with another human being is just our gift that we can give. And maybe sometimes we can help them solve their problems. And maybe sometimes as leaders, the best way for them to solve their problem, the best way for us to help them is let them solve them themselves, but we still see them. So just to be able to ground this, the key thing here is in order for us to bring more compassion into our leadership, we need to connect with empathy, but we need to lead with compassion. And just to walk you through what this looks like, again, you see a person that is struggling. We know that we can get triggered. We have that spark of empathy. And what can happen to us is we can go into a mode of emotional empathy, which can lead to empathetic hijack and can lead to burnout. And the alternative for us is to be able to recognize that spark of empathy, that moment of connection, and instead go towards rational empathy, compassion, and then to action. And like I said, sometimes the best form of action is no action at all, so long as it's a compassionate non-action. But just to be able to put this in a quote, this is Paul Pullman, former CEO of Unilever, and one of the things that he said to us in our interviews, and it makes sense. He said, if I would empathize with all of my employees, I would never be able to make a single decision. You need to have empathy, but you need to run a business with compassion. But at the same time, compassion alone isn't enough. We also need to be able to have wisdom. So compassion is that genuine care with that intention to be of benefit. At the same time, we know that as leaders, we need to make tough decisions. We need to let people go. We need to give tough feedback. We need to tell people things they don't want to hear. And that's also being a good leader. So today, we need to be able to combine both compassion and wisdom. And what I want to share with you is the framework that we use to be able to assess how to bring more compassion and wisdom into the table, and also specifically looking at the barriers, what holds us back. And for this, I want to introduce to you what we call our matrix of wise compassion. You can see going on the vertical, the difference between having compassion versus being indifferent, and on the horizontal, the difference between having wisdom versus not. And when we look at the barriers, what holds us back, the first one is to be in quadrant 1, which we call caring avoidance. Essentially, when we let care be a barrier to us doing the things that we know that we need to do. And if any of you have ever been in a situation where you didn't give somebody that tough feedback because you didn't want to hurt their feelings, you've been in that quadrant. Maybe a show of hands to know I'm not alone. Yes, we've all been there. Yes. The key thing here with this matrix is we can all end up in any one of these quadrants depending on the situation, depending on the day, depending on the context. So it's not a judgment no matter where we end up. And I say that specifically because I want to invite you to consider this quadrant, which we call ineffective indifference. And you may say to me, Jacqueline, you don't know me. I'm a very mindful leader. I would never end up in the quadrant of ineffective indifference. That sounds awful. And I will tell you, we all end up here. We end up here because we're busy, because we have unconscious biases, because we're under pressure, we're not paying attention. And the other thing, as I said earlier, wisdom and compassion is just like beauty. It's in the eye of the beholder. I may think I'm an extremely wise and compassionate leader, and you may all think I'm in quadrant 3. So it's an opportunity for me to pay attention. The other quadrant that we can be in is what we call quadrant 4, uncaring execution. And this was really where we saw a lot of leaders, especially more senior leaders, end up because they thought they had to make that choice. They thought that to be a good leader, they had to sometimes close their heart to just get things done. I can't be everybody's best friend. I have to be able to run this business. You probably know those types of leaders. Maybe you have been those types of leaders. And what we really see here, what happens to us, is when we actually are succumbed to our own fears, or our own fear of not being able to get things done, our own fear of not being able to deliver the results, that makes us think we have to make this binary choice. And that's the real opportunity that we have, is to recognize we don't need to make that binary choice, that we can bring both wisdom and compassion into our leadership, so long as we're intentional about it and we have some tips and some skills along the way. So just to be able to start off with just an opportunity for reflection, I would just love for you to consider just for yourself, where would you say that you are most of the time in terms of the matrix of wise compassion? And being honest with yourself. Do you sometimes know you avoid doing hard things because you don't want to hurt people's feelings? Or are you that leader that says, you know what, I just got to get things done? The other thing, though, that when we look at this with organizations, is this is not only an individual journey. We are social beings, and we adapt based on what we think is appropriate in the culture and the container that we're in. And so one of the other things is not only to look at compassionate leadership as a solo journey, but also to recognize that for us to be able to create conditions where we can create compassionate organizations. And that's why one of the other questions that I'll just ask you as a reflection is, where do you think your organization is in terms of the matrix of wise compassion? And even if, let's say, again, because of this room, you guys, maybe you're all already in quadrant 2. But the invitation is, and this was something that when we spoke with C-suite leaders, they said over and over again, they said, even though I think I'm doing okay most of the time and doing hard things in the human way, guess what? I can always get better. So being able, I just want to now share with you just some of the insights that we saw from some of our research, and then I want to end with a close in terms of the solution of how to bring more wisdom and compassion to your leadership. The first, and this is just from a specific study that we did of over 20,000 leaders, and what's really interesting is this is how leaders rated themselves based on their level of understanding of how they saw themselves as being wise and compassionate. You can see a number of them recognized them not so much in terms of quadrant number 3, but the majority of them did see themselves as being both wise and compassionate. And just so you know, this was a survey that we did in partnership with HBR, and we did also recognize that there was a selection bias, particularly in this one, because it was labeled as a compassionate leadership. So people that are generally more compassionate are the ones who are going to fill out the survey, just to be clear. Nevertheless, some very interesting results in 20,000 leaders, so statistically still significant, and also across a broad range of cultures, as I mentioned. One of the things that we found was that the majority of leaders are out of sync with how they are perceived, how they perceive themselves in terms of compassion versus how they're seen by their employees. Now, the good news is there was a large number that were in sync, 45%, and we call them we leaders, actually were in sync. And that's where you get those benefits that I said on the teal bar in terms of outstanding outcomes for your employees. But the key thing is 55% were out of sync. And I want to really emphasize this. There's two different ways that we found that leaders could be out of sync with their employees. The first one is the one you might expect. It's when I think I'm an incredibly compassionate leader and you guys all think I suck. That is not a good quadrant to be in. And what happens in that case is there's negative impacts for you because I'm out of sync with you. You as employees would have a higher chance of burnout, less organizational commitment, higher stress, all kinds of negative outcomes. And that we saw a lot. But here's the other thing that we saw a lot. And this is, I think, something really interesting for all of us to explore maybe over the next couple of days. We also saw a lot of leaders that were out of sync the other way. Essentially, they didn't think they were compassionate enough. And their employees were like, Jacqueline, you got this. And what we found in that case was many leaders themselves were more at risk of burning out, had higher levels of stress, and were essentially doing damage to themselves because they were trying too hard to solve everybody else's problems. And it wasn't helping them and it wasn't helping their people. Can anybody relate to that or have seen that? Maybe not in yourself, but maybe in yeah. So this is something that we found was critically important for us to recognize that if we want to bring compassionate leadership into ourselves and into our organizations, we need to be selfishly self-serving. We need to put our own oxygen masks on first. A couple of other things that we found, because it's just kind of interesting, and I am happy to make these slides available later, but this is actually just one of the things that we looked at in terms of as leaders rise up in ranks, what happens in terms of their wisdom and their compassion. And what we found, and I'll just highlight some things because I know it's hard to see, what you can see is the yellow dot that I've just circled is how executives at the top of the house rate themselves in terms of wisdom and compassion. And you can see they see themselves as having above average wisdom and actually pretty good compassion. Here, though, is what's interesting, is here is where employees rate executives in terms of their wisdom and compassion. You can see the lowest level of compassion and actually not so wise. And this is in direct opposite to what you can see here that I've highlighted. This is where team leads, what we defined as the first level of leader, rate themselves in terms of wisdom and compassion. It's all relative, so it makes sense that they would be at the bottom of the spectrum. But very interestingly, here is where team leads are rated by their followers in terms of their level of wisdom and compassion. And we wanted to dig into this a little further. And first of all, it kind of makes sense. You know, a team lead has, first of all, the ability to be able to connect, probably a smaller span of control, knows people more on an individual basis. And at the end of the day, if people don't like things, they can always say, yeah, wasn't my decision. It was up there, right? So it's understandable that team leads can be able to create those greater connections. At the same time, what we also know, though, and this was something that we really explored in terms of senior leaders, is that a lot of senior leaders, as they rose up in the ranks, they made the assumption that they had to close off their heart. And so what we talk about here when we work with leaders is that really looking at that you do not, although you have that greater span of control, although of course you're making decisions that are affecting more and more people, you can actually bring more wisdom and compassion. And in fact, organizations, our belief is that organizations that get this are the ones who are going to be able to retain more people, have more productivity, have more creativity, and are going to be the ones that are successful in the future. Two other things I just want to share quickly is we also looked at it from an industry perspective. We saw some interesting trends you can just see here in consumer and retail. The leaders thought of themselves quite highly in terms of their wisdom and compassion, their followers not so much. Interestingly, and especially being here in Washington, D.C., government employees, leaders you can see here, rated themselves as very low on wisdom and compassion, but they were rated quite highly by their employees. One other interesting finding, and this is something that I would love to explore with people further, but don't have time today, is that, and this is consistent with many other research that's been done on gender, women tend to underestimate their level of wisdom and compassion versus how they are seen by their employees, and men, I'm sorry for those men in the room, tend to overestimate more data I will share, but in another time. All right. So what I want to do now is to be able to share the solve, what we saw as being the key to be able to bring more wisdom and more compassion to the table. And it's essentially a flywheel concept. The idea of a flywheel, the first time you spin it, it's hard. The more you spin it, the easier it gets. And it has 4 stops on the flywheel. The first one is caring presence, the idea of being able to be here now. I don't have to tell you, you all know that if you're not here, you really can't care. If you're not paying attention to your people, you can't be compassionate. So that's the first step. The second step is caring courage. It takes courage to be able to step into difficult conversations, to overcome our natural tendency to not want to hurt somebody else's feelings, or to not want to, or to face the fact that I may not be able to deliver on my results. The next step is caring candor. With a mantra, each of these, as you can see, has mantras. Direct is faster. The idea of being able to make sure that we don't beat around the bush, that we bring the issue to the table, that we have the conversation that needs to happen in the most direct and caring way. And the final step is caring transparency. And for that, we look at a number of things. One, that we recognize communication is a two-way street. What I'm sending, I need to make sure that is what you are receiving. So making sure there is clarity, but also really about being vulnerable, bringing authenticity to our leadership, which then enables us to learn from our mistakes, because this is a journey. It's not easy. It's not that one time we become a compassionate leader and then everything is fixed and we're perfect from then on, but then being able to go back to being present with myself, learning from my mistakes, trying again and going through the wheel. And this is what we found, that ultimately from a data perspective is able to create the conditions where we have greater trust, greater psychological safety, and greater performance. So a couple of quick tips just to be able to help in terms of hopefully to help you to bring more compassionate leadership into your organization. The first one around be here now is the power of the pause. Simply starting every meeting with a moment of silence to be able to let everyone check in. Simple, but extremely powerful. Another one, courage over comfort, avoiding that empathy trap. Whenever you feel overwhelmed, if you could feel in that exercise that I guided you through today, you know what empathy feels like. Breathe, release, relax. Hopefully then to be able to make that neurological shift. Direct is faster. The tip is don't beat around the bush. Say what needs to be said in the most caring and kind way so that people know where they stand. And finally, the last tip is clarity is kindness. Be vulnerable. Ask for help. Dare to care. We're not perfect. We get to be human too in creating a more human world of work. So I'd just like you to take a moment to just consider for yourself in your own leadership journey if there's one of those things that you think would be able to be helpful for you or for your organization in bringing more wisdom and more compassion to the table. And I'd also like to invite you, if you'd like to follow up, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Jennifer, if you could just stand up and wave. So I know I went through a lot of that statistics very quickly, and as well, the flywheel and the tools. If you'd like more information, you can come check us out at the booth. You can scan the QR code. You can stop by at the table and say hello. And you can also email me directly if you have questions.